Hi, this is Chuck Wolf, and I have the pleasure of having a guest today. This is the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, and it's WPKN, 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio in Bridgeport, Connecticut. You can also hear it podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, or Stitcher, and this interview will also be on YouTube, as well as on the Public Radio Exchange. The person I get a chance to interview today is Alessandra Gonzaga, and she's in Brazil. And Brazil is having their challenges right now, as we have with the COVID-19 virus. And we're going to talk some about that, but also we're going to talk a lot about emotional intelligence, because Alessandra is one of the professionals in the world who knows quite a bit about emotional intelligence and is really, really smart about how she uses it and how she teaches about it. So I had the pleasure of meeting her a while back in New York City. It was at the International Society of Emotional Intelligence, and David Caruso, who was a colleague of mine and was the person who certified Alessandra in the MSCEIT, the Mayer Salve Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test of Abilities, of Emotional Abilities. And during that time, she got to know him pretty well, and when we were at the conference, he introduced us. And I found out that Alessandra had done some amazingly, really creative, wonderful work that made the MSCEIT so much easier to understand for people than what the typical report might look like. She had her own way of taking the data and using the data to create a really, really clever presentation of the information in ways that were very user-friendly. And at that time, I went up and visited with her after I saw her presentation, and then had the chance to talk with her, and we've become very friendly over the years and did some work together for a while, and hope to do some work together again sometime. So Alessandra, if you could tell our audience a little bit about you, just a little bit about where, about what's going on in Brazil, but also just a little bit about your background in emotional intelligence and what you've been doing, because I know that you have learned about the MSCEIT, but I also know you got certified in what has been known as the Dan Goleman and Richard Boyatzis instrument of emotional intelligence, the ESCI. And so if you tell us a little bit about that and your experience with that, and about having Dan Goleman come by and visit for a while, and then having all kinds of students show up for Dan's presentation, both while he was there and then for a recorded version. So lots to talk about. I'm really excited to have you on the show. And Alessandra's going to be interviewing me as well, because she does a podcast in Brazil. So
yeah, I do have one podcast about AI. Thank you so much, Chuck, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And well, I've been studying emotional intelligence since my master's degree in clinical psychology. This was 2007 or something like that. And I fell in love with MSCEIT because MSCEIT was at that time, I think it's still now it is, a very clever way to combine all the abilities of emotional intelligence. And I think I remember even in 2008, when I made my certification in Yale with Dr. Caruso, that I was amazed when he introduced us about the using emotions ability. And he said about how emotion can be used like a toolbox. So you pick an emotion for the best behavior. And I remember that, wow, so emotions can be a toolbox. So emotions contains data. Emotion must be understood and must be analyzed in order to improve behavior. So that's wow. And since then, I remember about mood meter. Even mood meter we use in executive education. I know about the amazing job that Dr. Mark Bracht is doing in schools using mood meter. I have his book here, Permission to Feel. I bought this year, but we use for years mood meter with executives and in companies, because I think this is the most amazing approach of AI to learn how to attach emotion to behavior. This is so loud and clear when we explain to them. So that said, we are living a very difficult moment here in Brazil, Charles. And here the pandemic, the COVID-19, we have already 55,000 deaths in Brazil and 1.2 million people affected. And here in my state is not so bad. I live in the south of Brazil. Right now is winter here. This is making authorities and everybody very worried because we have already all the disease of the winter. And it's not so cold as there, but it's cold here too, close to the point of the snow. It's close. It's very rare to have snow here, but we have. So it's very cold. And right now we have until now 500, let me see the last numbers, just not tell you something that is not, 500 deaths in my state. So it's not so bad as in the rest of Brazil, but we are very worried. And as professors of emotions, of human emotions and how to cope that, we are very, I'm losing the word here, very attached to the idea of learning and understanding how to cope anxiety, and depression, frustration, angst. Angst is a very old word about all the emotions that you can't cope anymore and that are with you for a long time, during days even. And that's why it's not more just sadness or just anger, it's a mixed. And we must learn how to cope that, because otherwise you stay unhealthy physically and mentally. It's a very
So you have several different roles that you play. You're a professor.
Yeah.
You're also, I know that you've been a coach to people.
Yeah.
And I also know that you've actually been either a trainer or consultant to large organizations from time to time as well. You've worked in some.
I can say, Chuck, that I have 3 roles. Professor of EI in our universities, 3 largest private universities here in Brazil. I teach there in this South America, in this South state. It's very close to Argentina. I'm saying all this because I know that in Brazil people imagine Rio de Janeiro and it's very hot and Amazonia. We are far, far, far from that. We are most like Argentina than Rio because it's very cold here. And so I'm a professor, I'm a facilitator in the companies with workshops, something like the same as you do there. After I will ask you to say something about this work, because I would like to take this audio to our podcast here in Brazil. And that's the 3rd job, as coach, as executive coach, but always in EI field. Always about emotions in the workplace and emotional.
So now, do you carry a model of emotional intelligence with you? Because I know you've learned at least 2 different ones, and there's many out there. So how do you, at this point, how do you think about or define for yourself and for your clients what emotional intelligence is, Alessandra?
Oh, that's a very nice question, because I think every single model has its catch. But there is a framework that is common in all them, even in the work of Professor Gary Lowe and Darwin Nelson there in Texas. The EI learning system is the name of this approach, because they teach EI in college students, and I like very much their techniques. But if you pick up MSCEIT, EI learning systems, and ASCII, all of them, they have in common this. Emotional intelligence is about identify or recognize, that was the word that I was searching for. Emotional intelligence is about recognize emotions in yourself and in others, and regulate emotions in yourself and in others. The difference is that in this KIT model, this intrapersonal and interpersonal is all combined. When we talk about the 4 abilities, perceive, using, understanding, and managing emotions, we are implicitly talking about ourselves and in others. And in other models, this is very separated. So one thing is talk about you and your self-control and your self-awareness. And another thing is about awareness in social awareness and in relationships. So, but I think it's the basic approach of some part is to recognize feelings and to experience them. Another part is to regulate them, what I can do about it, how I change this feeling, how I can put myself in the best mood clothes to go outside. So I think they are similar in some way.
So the best
So
mood.
tell me you, Chuck. Now it's my turn. Now it's my turn.
That's great. That's great. Okay.
Tell me about your background. I think it's huge. And tell me how is going on there right now with COVID-19.
So in our country, in the Northeast, I think the explanation is that while the West Coast got some people from China in, we in the New York City area got lots of people from Europe as well as China, all kind of flooding into New York City. It's sort of like a focal point for everyone in the world, really. And so New York got hit the hardest because before we really knew what was happening, I mean, I think the president of our country did stop people coming in from China initially, but he didn't stop the people from Europe. And no one really knew what was happening for a while. And people kind of thought it wasn't going to be as serious as it obviously became. And so in the very early stages, before we knew how devastating this disease was, we were all kind of struggling with, is this going to be serious? Is it just going to be a little pocket here and there? We had no idea that the whole world was going to be impacted the way it is, including what's happening now in your part of the world. Because now in our southern states, which is really curious, because we thought, I mean, again, we're learning so much about this that we didn't know. We thought that maybe in the hot weather, it would be less likely that it would be as contagious as it has been. So we thought we were kind of not over it, because we thought it might come back in the fall again, but we thought we had a respite, that we could start to enter the workforce again, that we could start to open restaurants up again. And some of the states that have done that are now, I know Texas is on hold right now, for instance. They said, well, we want to open up, we really can't, because all of a sudden the hospitals in Texas being inundated with patients, the highest numbers they've had. So for a short moment in time, we thought we may have hit the peak of it and have passed it. Now, where I live in Connecticut, I have to say the governor in Connecticut, Governor Lamont, has done a nice job. I don't know, it's hard to say a nice job when lots of people have died and so many people in nursing homes had died, and it seemed like we didn't do what we should have done to protect our elderly across the country, but especially in the Northeast. But I think overall, Governor Lamont has done a nice job with trying to understand and respond as quick as he can and include all the possible voices that he should be listening to and trying to act as a responsible executive. I give him a lot of credit. At the same time, people are struggling with, you know, how emotions over time, Alessandra, you can't stay angry that long. I mean, you can if you keep getting
cortisol can't just be up all the time.
Right. So I think people began to just tire of being afraid. And so they started to go back out. And then when it looked like it might be behind us, people stopped thinking they needed masks. And then when it didn't look like it impacted young people started to congregate and weren't as frightened as they might have been in the very beginning. And now it seems it's hitting young people. Not babies, not really young children, but teens and young adults. It seems like it doesn't, I don't know where the boundaries are and whether the virus is mutating or changing or so forth. So everybody that I know is struggling with enormous amount of emotions.
That's the word I was looking for, is struggling. We are struggling too. That's it.
And the people I think that are extroverts, more so than introverts.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I have the same idea because people like, I don't know if you are the same as me. I use an extrovert cloth to give classes, and then I put that cloth in my home with my cats, husband, and child as soon as I got home. So I'm an introvert. For me, it's okay be at home, reading and talking and teaching, but I can see how suffering is for the one that was not at home and that the home was just a place to sleep. These people is really, really suffering. And
I agree, and I'm similar in the way that I act when I'm out performing, if you will, where I'm either a speaker or I'm somehow coaching someone. I'm very engaged. I'm really enjoying it. I love the activity. I love the creativity, the critical thinking. All that's great. But I also love my alone time. I really enjoy gardening. I like hiking in the woods. I like being with very close people that are very close to me and my family in particular. So I don't struggle as much with feeling the need to be with groups of other people. I mean, I enjoy that when I do it, but I don't miss it the way my wife does, for instance, or one of my grandson. My grandson is somebody who's very popular. He's very social. He's very bright. He's very giving. He's very caring, and he's desperately missing his friends.
yeah,
And
I
missing school.
understand totally.
And he's not alone. I think so many children are having such a hard time, as well as adults that are very extroverted and love the social relationship part of it. So I think people are finding ways to get together in backyards. It's strange because you can't go in somebody's home to use a bathroom or to get a drink.
Yeah.
You can't be in anybody's homes. So you can't.
We have this habit here, Chuck, about sharing a tea. There is this kind of cup that you made with, I don't know the name of this fruit. And we use this cup for this tea. And we used to share the tea as a local, a cultural moment of sharing. No that anymore. Everybody with his own cup. Nobody can share anything anymore.
So are you socially isolating too? Are you asked to stay in your homes and not to go to stores and
totally. We just go to the market sometimes. I take care of my mom. My mom lives 3 blocks from here, so I make the groceries to her and I take care of her. She's very alone, and I give her some extra sessions using WhatsApp. I talk with her with the camera on all day, so she doesn't feel so lonely. And also here, something interesting happened. You are talking, I was remembering. March was the month where government say to isolation, and the companies has to put people isolated. So the first 2 or 3 weeks we are engaged. Wow, we will bite this virus. This is nothing. We can be at home. Oh, look how nice his children are at home with their parents. Let's engage with some place to do. And then April, people start to feel a little bit tired, and about the end of April and May, anger came, everybody angry, everybody yelling at the market, where is your mask, ma'am? Something like that.
Exactly. Isn't that true?
And then now, I think people is exhausted. People already felt everything. People is thinking, I can't even remember my other life. What is life anymore? I don't know. So now is the desperation and plus for many of us.
That's exactly, you're describing what's happening in our world too, Alessandra. So it's very interesting that it's happening as well in your world. And one of the things that that I've done over the years is I've created this emotion roadmap, which basically says that if you're not feeling the way you want to feel or you need to feel, then ask yourself what would be ideal to feel, and see about creating the ideal. see if there's some ways to create the ideal. So one of the things that I realized was that sometimes people need things to look forward to. So in trying to help with my grandson, for instance, I was talking with my daughter, and also my grandson visited, so another story, but when he came over, I was trying to tell him about this too. But I have a great picture of him looking just so disinterested. It's like kind of unbelievable.
What are you talking about?
Exactly.
The new generation is not so interested in think about their feelings. Talk, yes, it's okay for us here. I am talking about the teenagers. I have a teenager at home. She's very emotionally intelligent, very much. She can explain their feelings. She can see some characters in the movies and say, oh, she's feeling guilty. She's feeling resentment. She can explain the feelings of others. But she doesn't like to talk with us about it. They have their own groups to talk about it.
At some point, I think my grandson and I will have good conversations about this because he's incredibly bright and he has great questions and he's really curious. But I think he's really struggling right now. But when talking to my daughter, one of the things that they realized was that they could plan some things. So one of the things they did was they decided to go on a vacation by renting a recreational vehicle that has its own bathroom, its own kitchen, and they're going to go out and camp at a campsite.
That's nice. That sounds amazing.
What about trying to do that on more of a weekly basis so that, you know, you have a time when you're going to go out and visit with my grandson's friends. You have to socially distance, but you're going to be in the yard together. Maybe there's a few things that you can do together, whether it's kicking a ball or something. You know, and then maybe you can do something with his dad, going out and shoot basketball hoops. They've got a basketball in the driveway. They have my daughter and my grandson are both really competitive, and so they have, you know, they're using Fitbits, their watches, to measure how many steps they go, and they're competing. And you know, so they're trying to plan what will be fun. Right?
Yeah.
And now they're doing how many books can you read or how many pages can you read? And
that's a very nice competition.
Yeah.
Here our competitions are about cats because we have 5 cats. So we put them compete at the balcony to see who will take the ball. There is no much things to do at home. So what people is really doing is being in internet, Netflix, and meetings, and this is another kind of emotional exhaustion because, you know, I was studying about this, Chuck. Our brain is not made to make all these moments in a screen, and even not more with 50 people talking and looking to you. And you trying to read their faces, or sometimes just 2 letters of their names. We are not supposed to do this kind of interactions. We are social beings. So it's kind of hard for them try to pick up the feelings of their friends. And we are still talking about teenagers, but I think also in companies, because my executives, I can see that when you don't have the data, we are talking about the MSCEIT model now. When you don't have the information about how the other person is feeling, because you don't have their voice, you don't have their faces, you even don't know what they are doing. You just see a sentence coming from them. What you do, you complete the gap with your imagination. And that's why this moment also make all these paranoid feelings and thinkings come to us, because we need to ask people about how they are feeling. Otherwise, you assume how they are feeling. For example, we are talking here in a conference. Let's say you go out and just leave me talking alone. I don't know what happened, you know? And I will start to think, wow, Chuck doesn't like me. He thinks I'm crazy. He just moved. But I'm just completing information and data that I don't receive. because it's not the same as we are person to person. Anyway, I was just thinking. But I have a question for you about the roadmap, because I think this is an amazing job. And I like very much how you describe this, that we think the ideal way to feel. Do you think that right now people can catch this ideal way to feel? How is this moment for the roadmap?
Usually when people are feeling something, it's often in the background, right? You don't often think about the fact that you're feeling something. Yeah, we're always feeling something. When I describe it, Alessandra, I think of it as breathing. So that if I mention to people that I noticed that you're breathing, everybody kind of smiles like you did. And but I said, but you probably weren't paying any attention to that. You were just breathing.
Yeah.
And I say that's sort of how feelings happen too. Most of the time we're just feeling things, but we're not really paying attention to them unless we call attention to them. The concept of a roadmap almost only shows up when people are in dire straits or in struggles or something's challenging them. Now, I think you can be smarter about it once you understand the concept, and I'll explain it in a second. But when I found people who were smart that were stuck, it seems to me that most of the time, if not almost all the time, when smart people are stuck, good critical thinkers are stuck, it's because something emotional is happening inside them. They really don't know how to respond because something emotional is happening and they're worried about escalating or confronting or making the wrong choice somehow, or they're worried about another person's emotions that they're dealing with that's important to them. Maybe it's somebody they love, somebody at home. Maybe it's a boss. Maybe it's a colleague or a customer or somebody that's important that they're worried that if they say or do the wrong thing, it's going to make things worse instead of better. And so whenever that's happening, when I ask people is the roadmap is about trying to understand what are the feelings that are part of this situation that's so challenging. And so I ask people to tell me about their circumstance. And then I ask, so let's just give me sort of the summary, if you will, of what's going on. And then let me ask you what you're feeling about it. And then I ask, so if you could just make magic happen and you would feel something different, what would it be? What would be ideal, do you think, to feel for you? So that's how I ask them about them. And then I ask, now the people, if this isn't just about something going on inside of you, sometimes it's just something internal. But if it's also has to do with somebody else or a few other people, who else is key to what you're trying to do? And what is it that he or she or they are feeling? And what would be ideal for them? If you could just, I mean, again, you're assuming you know, you may not, but based on all the information you have that you're worried about, what do you think they're feeling? And what would you like them to feel? And then I ask, okay, so is there a way that you can make that happen, that you could change how you're feeling to what's ideal?
That's very nice. That's the catch. That's the catch. Right? How you change it.
How do you do it? Now, here's the key thing. There's a science that you've learned, that you know, which is the science of emotions. And that's what Mayer and Salovey really taught us, Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer. But then there's also the art. And that comes from years of being a therapist years ago. To me, it's like I have to understand not only how emotions work, I have to understand how they work for Alessandra. That's different than how they work for me. Because otherwise, I'm going to assume you're like me, and I'm going to try and treat you the way I would treat myself. And if we're very similar, then that might work. But lots of times people have sort of some unique idiosyncrasies, things that are unique to them. That, maybe it's a style piece. You know how the Myers-Briggs, we talked about extroverts and introverts. Yeah. But there's other style tools that tell you about, some people care about people, some care about facts, some people care about achievement, some just like to compete. But whatever it is, I try to understand all those pieces when I'm thinking about how do I get this other person to feel the way I want them to feel. I try to think about who they are, what's important to them, how do I motivate them, how do I engage them.
Yeah, so, you said the word now, motivation. This is a kind of contradiction in emotional intelligence field. When you see the Goleman's approach about coming from Korn Ferry group, there is 4 dimensions: self-awareness, self-control, social awareness, and relationship management. So where is the motivation in the first books that he said about? When he came to Brazil, he said that motivation goes to the self-regulation branch. It's there. Motivation is there. Okay. But you said something that is even beyond that. If you are a leader and you don't know how to read people's needs, how can you read them? You can't. So, and we are talking now about needs and values, basement of the motivation. So even this is, I think for me, this is a step behind the emotions. After comes the emotions and the feelings and how I read the word. But when I read the word, I already have a value. I already have a need. I already have something to frame this word and give me that emotion. And that is the approach of people in Texas that I like it very much. They said they have values and then emotions and then behaviors. So it's interesting, right? You are saying the same now, what you said about motivation. When you read someone, yes, you can read his mood or her mood, but this is like a photo. But if you don't know the person, what this person believes, what is important for her or for him, you can't actually manage its feelings. It's important to have that too. Sure, I remember Dr. Caruso saying, perceive is take a photo, understand is having a movie with the person. I understand that. That's also something amazing about MSCEIT. Is the only school of EI that talks about understanding feelings, causes and effects, triggers, and how it's important to be a time with this person. Take a time to know someone, right?
Right. The MSCEIT for me was so incredibly powerful when I was learning about the idea that emotions, and we've talked about this yesterday when we chatted, about emotions drive thoughts, drive behaviors. And you had said, well, does the thought come before the emotion? Does the emotion come before the thought? And you know,
what do you think, Chuck? What do you think?
Well, this is what I think. I think if you can tell me which came first, the chicken or the egg, then I can tell you which. Right?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know that anyone could ever tell us which comes first. And I think just like motivation, there's an emotion that's associated with something cause us to be motivated, or if we know what motivates us, does that create the emotion? I think it's sort of they sort of work like this.
How important is for us to labeling? And that's how I remember now the Professor Mark Brackett. I think right. he has this quote, what you name it, you can tame it. This makes sense.
Oh, by the way, Mark was on my radio show. I interviewed Mark.
Yes, I know. You are so powerful, Chuck. I want all your interviews for us here. So let me make you this question. Okay. Can you pick up something of all your experience in emotional intelligence for this moment that you are still learning or that you just learned, just came to your mind, some insight about emotional intelligence and our moment in COVID?
I can tell you two things. One has happened a while back, but it's still just, I think I'm the only one in the world talking about it right now. Although I did present the idea, of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence with Dan Goleman and Carrie Chernis and Boyatzis, and there's a whole bunch of people that are really top of the field. I presented this idea to them, and that is that many years ago, I worked in schools as a school counselor. And it was during a time when we were still thinking that young kids who couldn't read by second grade just weren't smart. And teachers were saying, I've got some kids in my room that really can't read and they aren't smart, and I get that. But I also have some other kids in my room that are really smart, but they're not reading either. and they're not the same. And something's off. And it was that, at that point in time, people began to think about, well, maybe, just maybe, what if we taught them differently? What if somehow they learn differently? Or physiologically, things aren't developed at the same rate. So some things in their brain aren't working the same way, even though they're smart, they just haven't developed yet to be able to read. So is there some other way we might teach them? And so we began to talk about learning disabilities. And that was, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago. Now, when that happened, it changed the way we thought about children who couldn't read. We all of a sudden saw people differently. So here's my insight of something new that I discovered in the last couple of years, Alessandra. So the MSCEIT measures abilities. All the other tools that measure emotional intelligence, it's your perception or somebody else is seeing you and observing you and perceiving how they think.
Peer evaluation, yeah.
But an ability test is like a math test. If I ask you, are you good at math? You might think you're good at math, but then I test you on algebra and geometry and trigonometry and calculus, and pretty soon we know by taking a test, right? So with abilities, emotional abilities, it's more like that. Now, I think at some point they'll improve the test, but that's what we have with the Mayer-Salve-Crusoe emotional intelligence, is a test of abilities. Now, what if, because you understand the test, you know that if we measured how well somebody perceives emotions, which was your question initially just a moment ago, and they can't, they show up as really, really low on perceived. The other way we get emotional data is on sensations, the use of emotions, that they feel, emotionally feel what somebody else feels. Now, if you are low on that and you're low on perceive, you have lousy data coming in, right?
Yeah, a blind view, because you don't have all the experiential area.
So if we're looking at a leader, because you and I work with leaders, and we're thinking about that leader, and he's not getting along or she's not getting along well with others, we think most of the time it's attitudinal somehow. They just don't value them the same way, or they don't treat them as well as they could. But what if they don't know? They think they know. They think they're getting along, but they don't realize that their behavior is really upsetting to the people they're interacting with, because no one's willing to tell them. And they think
they are flying blind. That's a very nice insight, Chuck. They are flying blind because they don't receive informations.
So they
I have a case like this. You are remembering me, this client, you are describing him, and he was terrible in perceiving, and he was a big boss, a big guy, and yet he gave this idea of love him or hate him to people, because it was so hard to know what he was feeling. He didn't share too much. He didn't engage in capture from people's feelings. That's very nice insight.
So what if we now recognize emotional disabilities? Years ago, I used to be a therapist, and I would have families and couples sometimes that would come to me, and it wasn't unusual for a woman, this is stereotyping, but this is what happened. A woman would say, my husband doesn't seem to know what I'm feeling. I'd like him to know what I'm feeling, and unless I actually just straight out tell him, I just don't think he's paying attention to me or trying very hard to know what I'm feeling. So we talk about that. I try and help them resolve that, work through it. But what if I had the MSCEIT and I could test the husband and I found out, you know what, he can't.
He just can't.
It's not that he doesn't want to, and if you look at him, he looks like he says he feels terrible about this, but he just can't because he's not able.
Wow.
That's a game changer. That changes everything about how we see things. And what if we ask supervisors at every level in our company to pay attention, not just on an annual basis where we take a survey, but every day, pay attention to the people that work directly for you. Because if you see something off, jump in and intervene before something goes the wrong way, before something bad happens. If you see somebody's really off and you're paying attention, just go up and ask them, are you okay today? Is there something you want to talk about? Or because you look like things might not be okay, and I'm just concerned about you. And so if you do it out of caring and curiosity, and Dan Goleman talks about empathic concern. This is
yeah, and I like very much his approach about empathy. And you are talking about cognitive empathy, even less than concern empathy. Because if someone that can't read feelings anyway, can't provide cognitive empathy, I can repeat your story, I can understand what you just said, because I don't have the basement to catch you. So I think all the empathy types for this person are struggling.
So what, I'll come back to that in a second, because that's another insight actually. But the other thought I had about this is that if we understand that not all people who are in leadership roles at every level are capable of knowing what other people are feeling, is there some way we can help them compensate for that? Because it's important to know how people are feeling. So that's one of the insights, is that we have this concept that I think others will talk about over time. I don't know when, but at some point we'll recognize there are emotional disabilities, like learning disabilities, and we'll find ways to compensate for them and find ways to accept that certain things that we think are attitudinal really aren't.
That's very nice.
Change the way we see
and
it.
I have an insight when you said something about the how are you feeling, that remember me some strategic to give people. If you are a leader right now and you have your team abroad or remote, so easy to ask before you start, how are you feeling, to everybody. This is like a check-in for any meeting. Sure, people won't say all their lives after this moment, but it's so nice trigger you to be connected with your feelings. Before we start this meeting, how are you feeling? Wow. And I remember that one client of me, he said something about it. During this moment, he did this, and he never did it before. And the team is more connected than ever. Sure, we can say, oh, it's the moment, it's the crisis. But I think now more than ever, they are allowed to talk about their feelings in the environment of the company.
It certainly is changing, isn't it? Because we're seeing changes. It used to be, David used to talk about this, David Caruso. He used to talk about when you first show up at work, they tell you leave your feelings at the door.
Yeah, exactly. That was with me the same at the 90s. It was the same.
And now we're saying we recognize feelings. You can't leave them at the door, number one. And number two is if you pay attention to them, you can actually get the most out of everybody. But I think one of the things Gallup has done over the years is survey big companies across all the Americas, all over the world, really. And they find consistently that most companies, around 80% of all employees, are not really giving everything they can to their company. They're not fully engaged. Some are actively disengaged. Somewhere between 15 and 20% are actually trying to hurt the companies that they work for because they're so upset with how they've been treated. But the other 60 or so percent is dealing with disaffection. They don't feel cared about, so they're doing what they need to, but they're not doing what they could do if they felt cared about. And this is where Dan Goleman said something. One day we were in this consortium together, and Dan was talking about empathy, just like you were a moment ago. And he said, there's different kinds of empathy. There's the cognitive empathy, which the MSCEIT measures with understanding, right? And then there's the emotional empathy, which is the use measures the ability to feel sensations, measures how can you feel what somebody else feels.
Nice, he made the match with the MSCEIT. This I'm pointing down here. I never hear you saying
so there's
something
emotional
like that.
empathy, and then there's cognitive or intellectual empathy. And then Dan said there's empathic concern. And I thought, well, empathic concern is a value. It's not really a skill or a competency. It's not quite the same. Empathic concern is I care about you. But then honestly, Alessandra, over time, especially I got to teach for Dan in Vienna. I was mentioning to you at his last year in Vienna on his coaching certification program. And I was teaching about the roadmap, but I also was teaching about empathy. And I said, you know, when Dan said empathic concern is another part of empathy, I thought, well, that's not quite the same as intellectual or cognitive, which are skills, or emotional empathy. But empathic concern, if you don't have concern for others, then you can have intellectual empathy, you can have emotional empathy, and none of it matters.
Exactly.
It
Because
only
you don't do nothing about it.
Right? Without concern, what difference?
That's amazing. You know, I haven't went inside about empathy in his class here in Brazil. He was in September, last September here in Brazil. And I have this honor to give this class with him about emotional intelligence, sure. And then he said about the 3 kinds of empathy. And I asked him about the emotional contagion. If which one of them is the worst one to have a contagion. And sure, he said it was the affective one, the empathy as we know. But this is the catch, very interesting. The empathic concern actually protects you from the contagion because now you have compassion. And here, I make the match with the Buddhist approach. I became Buddhist during these days. It's not as a religion, as a practice of self-awareness, of just calm down the house, make meditation. And I really catch this as a positive emotion. You see, you said it's a value. I understand as a positive emotion. Some people say that is a virtue, a human virtue, but I think is a kind of the higher level of empathy. Exactly because the question is, what can I do for you? If you have the concern for the person, what can I do for you? This is the highest level of empathy. I don't know, maybe it's me being Buddhist. But I think it's so nice that you are not contagious with the suffering of the person. You actually engage in doing something. And okay, that was my catch with Dr. Gulliman. And
That's very interesting. I think your question before about what can I do for you is the question I've been asking on my radio show for 11 years now, but it's what I've been asking all my life. And when you say it, maybe it's the Buddhist part of you, I think it's the human part of all of us.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's asking that question. What can I do for others? But I think there's a big push to be tribal and to focus on who's most like me and who's going to protect me and I'm going to protect them, and all others are others and they're the stranger. And so somehow we've got to get past this idea that we're all part of the same human race. We all have a planet that we have to keep, you know, this is where we're all living on this same place. Let's keep our house and our planet clean and alive and safe and healthy.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of push in other directions. And anyway, I'm doing my.
But this, you see, we are ending this conversation, getting to the point where we are talking about universal emotions, and think about that we are different, and you can challenge me, and that my survival skills are up now. This is something human. But also is something human to care about each other. And what I really like about this work of emotional intelligence is that allow us to make the best of our humanity, right?
I agree. And one of the things that this, you know, what I've always felt about the emotion roadmap, Alessandra, was if I can help people find inner peace, because whenever they're struggling emotionally, they're churning inside and they're in turmoil and they're upset or whatever's happening. If I can help them find a way to find inner peace through planning emotionally to change how they're feeling to something that's more helpful. And that's not to say that negative emotions aren't helpful, because when you're angry at an injustice, that's appropriate. When you're sad because you've had a loss of some kind, whether a loved one or a job or something that's important to you, that's appropriate. But just at some point, being able to move past that and to move on with your life in a constructive and positive way is really what the roadmap was about as a tool. And so I'm hoping that the more people find inner peace, the better that the planet has for peace, world peace, right? If we all feel inner peace, there's less chance we'll be in conflict with one another. That's why
we will invite you to give classes here in Brazil. Now that we have this internet, I hope you can teach roadmap to our students, Chuck. Really, I hope so.
Well, thank you, and I would hope that will happen, I'm thinking. But one of the other insights, I want to share this because this is important, and I think you'll be able to do this in your work too. One of the things that I've found recently, this is brand new to me, is that one of my best friends, it's actually a first cousin of my wife, he actually worked really closely with me on emotional intelligence in schools, and he got very close with Mark Brackett, and Mark and this fellow Bruce and I, and Mark's uncle, who originally started all this with Mark, we all met back in 2004, and we started working together in schools. And Bruce got really embedded in this field, and he really got good at it. And one of the things that has happened to him in recent years is he got diagnosed with 2 forms of cancer at the same time. And he thought he wasn't going to make it. I mean, the prognosis was that he probably wouldn't make it. But here are the things you can do to try and make it. And he said that one of the things, and he's past it now. He seems like he's on the road to recovery and everything's going great. But it took several years before he got to that stage. He said in his darkest moments, all the work on emotional intelligence was incredibly powerful and positive and helpful to him in getting him past certain days that he felt like he just didn't want to go on. And so I've got some colleagues now that are both having some, there's lots of debilitating diseases out there that don't end. They just get worse over time, whether it's Parkinson's or MS or a bunch of them. And so I'm beginning to invite people to take, not to get certified, when I do a virtual course on the MSCEIT and the certification and the emotion roadmap, but to audit the course with me. I mean, they still pay to come, but they come to learn how to use these tools to help them to stay as healthy and positive as they can as they experience these physical illnesses. And I'm having some real interesting success with it. So it's something that you and everybody else in emotional intelligence can start thinking about is, this is another way to help folks with what we've learned about how to be more in touch with our emotions and how to make our emotions work for us instead of against us.
That's very nice. My students and also some clients sometimes ask this. Okay, now you are saying this is important. Okay, how can I change my feelings? How can I change my feelings? And I say that you have to be patient and you have to practice as any other skill you want to improve. You must practice. You must ask yourself, how do you feel today? If you are suffering from anxiety, how much today did you felt anxiety in the morning, in the afternoon, and right now, how are you feeling? So you are becoming closer to the moment. And when you are finally in the moment, catching the feeling, wow, now I am I'm feeling anxiety. Now you have this switch for changing. So I think our work is to approach the person to the real time of the feeling. And I say to them, when you are a ninja, before feel anxiety, you say, I don't go there. I don't go there because then I will feel anxiety. So you can anticipate your triggers.
That's a lot like when I'm teaching about the emotion roadmap. I talk about in your head mentally when something triggers you. That's starting to create the anxious feeling or the anxiety that you're talking about. I suggest to people, when you realize that there's a way that you can prevent that, and before you feel when you're not feeling anxious and you're calm and you're just thinking about it, you come up with certain strategies or tactics that are going to, you believe, be helpful in keeping you from becoming anxious, so that when the anxious moment appears in your brain and you start to realize that the triggers happened and you're starting down that path and you know it never ends well, can you get off and take a different road?
Yeah, exactly. That's so nice. And this is amazing, because when the person finally gets in the real moment, in the real time, in the awareness of the situation, in the mindful moment, they say, wow, it was so easy. Why I made so big such thing about it? because now I can look to my feelings and not be my feelings. I can have this amazing chair of an observer of myself and choose the way I want to feel. And I think this is possible. It's just about the training about it. And
well, listen, Alessandra, actually, we've talked the 55 minutes. And I thought it would go this fast because it's so much fun to talk to you. So I want to thank everybody who's been listening to WPKN and on YouTube, because it'll be on YouTube as well. And I want to say hello to all your listeners who are going to be on your podcast. And
yeah,
I'm delighted to meet all of you. I hope the subtitles capture this.
Yeah.
And everybody's able to understand me. But thank you so much, Alessandra, for doing it. It's been great visiting with you.
It was very nice, Chuck. Thank you so much. And I'm sure people in Brazil will love you. We want more about you soon. Okay?
Okay.